So we talked a lot this week about God providing. And I wanted to share a couple of my own personal stories of when God provided for me in some, I think, pretty profound ways. So I was in graduate school at Fuller Seminary in Los Angeles, and you may not be aware, but graduate students have no money. That's a surprise to you. So my car messed up, took it to get it fixed. And when I came back, it was a much larger amount than I expected. And so I pulled out the only credit card I had, which I'm sure I took it to the limit of the credit card, because they don't give graduate students high credit limits, if you're wondering about that too. And so I paid for my car repair with my credit card. And as I was driving on the way back home, I was just praying. And I said, God, I don't know how I'm going to pay this off. I have no idea. I need your help. So I get to my apartment, go up to the mailbox, and open up the mailbox. And there's an envelope in there from a family friend. She had lived with us during college and med school and that kind of thing. And I opened up the note. There was a note, and it said, bubblegum money. Well, my parents, when she was in med school and college, would just send her a little bit of money now and then and write on it, bubblegum money, just go buy what you need kind of thing. So my note said bubblegum money, and so I pulled out the check. And it was within a few dollars of the exact amount that I needed for my car repair. And I couldn't believe it. She had no idea that I would have been coming home that day. And she had been prompted by God to send me some bubblegum money that met my need. And that was powerful for me. Another incidents where God provided and showed up was during the great evacuation of Hurricane Rita. Does anybody remember this? Yep. Saw you on I-45. It was great. So my son was 3, and we were trying to evacuate with the rest of Houston, and decided to leave at 9 o'clock at night, which was not smart, but anyway. And my husband had to stay back at the hospital where he worked, so we took off. And so we're on I-45, and we started at 9 o'clock at night, and we got to Conroe. It was either noon or 2 p.m. the next day. That's a little foggy. But we drove all night. I'm sure a lot of you did the same thing. You know what I'm talking about. Anyway, so we're on I-45, and we're beginning to pass all the gas stations. You remember them. They had the bags, the grocery bags over all of them. No gas, no gas, no gas, no gas. And I was like, this is getting a little scary. One, I'm out by myself with a 3-year-old, and what am I going to do? So I just decided to do the only thing I knew to do. And I laid my hands on the dashboard, and I prayed like there was no tomorrow. And I prayed for hours. I said, God, just keep my gas. Just preserve my gas. Just let me just keep that gas in that gas tank. Because I just didn't know what else to do. So between noon and 2, can't quite remember, I was almost to my destination in Conroe, which was pretty much with a complete stranger I'd met once, but I just called and begged him that if I could stay there. And you know that. You probably had that too. And anyway, I'm almost to their house, and I pass a gas station, and I'm on the phone with my brother, and I'm like, oh my gosh, there's gas there. And he said, well, stop and get it. And I looked down at my tank, and I still had a half tank of gas after 15 hours on the road. And I said to him, I don't think I'm going to stop. And he said, are you crazy? And I said, well, there's people that need it more than I do, and I still have a half tank gas, so I'm just going to go. In that moment, that was so powerful for me that God provided something that I had asked for. He provided in the midst of my deficit. Well, today we're talking about a similar story where God provided for Elijah and the widow in their deficit, in their time of need. And I want to read that to you. This is one of the stories we talked about this week, so the kids will recognize it. It's in 1 Kings. Sometime later, the brook dried up because there had been no rain in the land. Then the word of the Lord came to him, go at once to Zarephath in the region of Sidon and stay there. I have directed a widow there to supply you with food. So he went to Zarephath. When he came to the town gate, a widow was there gathering sticks. He called her and asked, Would you bring me a little water in a jar so that I may have a drink?" As she was going to get it, he called, "And bring me, please, a piece of bread." "As surely as the Lord God lives," she replied, "your God lives," she replied, "I don't have any bread, only a handful of flour in a jar and a little olive oil in a jug. I'm gathering a few sticks to take home and make a meal for myself and my son so that we may eat it and die." Elijah said to her, "Don't be afraid. Go home and do as you have said. But first, make a small loaf of bread for me from what you have and bring it to me, and then make something for yourself and your son. For this is what the Lord, the God of Israel, says: The jar of flour will not be used up, and the jug of oil will not run dry until the day the Lord sends the rain." She went away and did as Elijah had told her. So there was food every day for Elijah and the woman and her family. For the jar of flour was not used up, and the jug of oil did not run dry, in keeping with the word of the Lord spoken by Elijah. Thanks be to God. So Elijah was this prophet of God, and he was in a very tumultuous time in the history of Israel. They were falling vulnerable to Baal worship, and it was happening all around them. King Ahab and his wicked wife Jezebel had led the people into Baal worship, in fact, so much so that they made it the state religion. And it was a religion so vile that I really can't say it in a G-rated sermon, so we'll move on. But Elijah, he had gone to Ahab and told him that because of this, there was going to be a drought for 3 years. Well, Elijah gave this terrible prophecy and then said, "See you later," and he went out and hid by a brook and watched it play out. There he was fed by ravens, and he drank from the brook. But the brook dried up. And God told him it was time to move on. And so he sent him to go to Zarephath and find a widow, and she would provide for him. This was especially unusual because widows were the poorest of the poor. They were the least likely to be able to provide, but yet God said, "Go and ask her to make him some bread." And she had so little. And the other interesting thing about this widow was she wasn't even an Israelite. She was a Gentile. If you go back and read the scripture, she refers to God as your God to Elijah. Even in disbelief, she felt compelled to be part of this miracle. And then God provided for her and her child until the drought was over. This is such a beautiful testimony of God pursuing and being present to all who believe, whether they were a Jew or a Gentile. You know, this summer we've been wrestling with hard scriptures and hard passages, and I think looking at passages that talk about miracles can be kind of hard. For many of us, miracles are one place where our doubts of faith may show up. Now, I know there are some of you out there, you're all in. You say, "Yeah, I see miracles every day. This is easy for me, I get it." And some of you say, "I've seen too much suffering. How can miracles really happen?" And may others of you say, "I see it sometimes. Sometimes I see it. But what happens when God doesn't provide?" And that's a hard place to be. It's a place I've been this week. One of my closest friends lost her 16-year-old son this week. I didn't get the miracle I'd been praying for 2 years. But even in the midst of all the suffering that this week with this family has entailed, they've still been able to give testimony to the amazing ways that God has showed up and revealed himself in the grief. You know, I think our tendency is to reduce miracles down to something God does for us or for someone. But what if the point of the miracles that happen is less about what God is doing and more about him showing himself to us? God revealing himself. Think about Jesus' first miracle. It was water to wine. It was a moment when he was starting to open up that window to let us see who he really was. He was revealing more of his character and more of his plan. When we look at miracles less of a genie in the bottle sort of scenario and more of an understanding that it's God doing his revealing and redemptive work in the world, then I think we are able to approach miracles very differently. Have you ever worked a puzzle and you didn't have the picture on the box? Such a bad idea, by the way. And you know, piece by piece, you're trying to put it together, and you don't know even what you're making. But then when you get done, the final picture is revealed. And along the way, you know, you have that one piece that does not fit, and you don't even understand why it's in the puzzle, and you try to throw it away, and somebody stops you because they know you're going to need it later. That's part of, I think, our lives, the story of our lives, that God is showing himself to us piece by piece by piece. Some of the pieces don't make sense or seem like they fit together, but one by one, the puzzle takes shape, and we see the whole picture. You know, I've sat at the very top of Reliant Stadium trying to watch the Texans, and I've sat at first base at the Astros. Do you know the difference when you're by first base or when you're up in the nosebleed section? It's pretty different, isn't it? When you're down at the bottom, it's electric. Everything's happening around you. You're so close to the action, you can almost feel it. You see things so clearly. Well, I think when God lets us see a miracle, it's those moments when he's letting us sit on the front row by first base, when we're getting up close and he's showing us his glory. So maybe you say, how do I get those tickets? How do I get to the first row, right? How do I get to see first base? Well, first, we do have to be open. We have to be open to the miracles that God wants to do. Elijah and the widow, they had to be open to seeing God's glory. I honestly think a lot of times we miss what God is doing because we simply don't even look up. We don't look around us to see where he's working, to see where he's placed us. We're in this constant state of controlling our lives and controlling our environment, and we leave no room for the Holy Spirit to work. Our posture is often not one that's poised to be part of a miracle. But Elijah and the widow, they were poised for the miracle. Elijah faithfully went to Zarephath to see the widow and ask her for food. It made no logical sense for him to do that. She was the least likely that would have something for him. But that's where he went. He went looking for her because that's what God had said. And the widow, she fed the stranger, putting her own son at risk. Against all parental instinct, she fed the stranger before her own child. She trusted that he knew what he was doing and that God would provide rather than worrying about her son's last meal. Even though she wasn't a believer, there was something drawing her to follow the instructions of Elijah's God and be part of his plan. He was revealing himself even to this poor, insignificant Gentile woman and bringing him into his greater plan. And she had her eyes open to be part of it. The other part of getting to be part of the miracle is to realize how tiny we are. A lot of the time, I think we walk around like toddlers, but far less cute. We have this feeling that the universe revolves around us, and the plans of God must benefit only us in that moment, rather than understanding that God has a greater plan that he's working out. It may not make sense even at that moment, but for us, we want to try to say, God, I want it now, when he's doing something bigger. For Elijah, one part of his plan that was bigger than the oil and the flour was that he was coming into Baal territory. He was walking straight into the fire, but he walked in and allowed Baal, who was just an idol, to do nothing, and the living Yahweh to perform a miracle. And then a couple chapters later, if you remember, Elijah, he had to go up on the top of Mount Carmel, and he had to prove, he tested the Baal and God. And if you remember, they built an altar, and the worshipers of Baal danced around and shouted and screamed, and nothing happened. And then Elijah said, dump a lot of water on this altar, and my God will still produce fire. And that's exactly what happened. I've often wondered if God gave Elijah that miracle of the oil and the flour to remind him, to make sure he knew that when he got to that bigger challenge on the mountain, God was going to be there and God was going to be present. I love to do, I call it my faithful inventory. When I'm facing a big challenge and I don't know how I'm going to get through it, I go back and I look at all of the times God was faithful and provided for me. All the times. And that helps me take on the bigger challenge. I think one of the reasons why my car had gas was because a month later, after that happened with Hurricane Rita, my son was diagnosed with a very devastating diagnosis. And I can't tell you how many times after that diagnosis that I went back to that tank of gas. And I thought, you know what? God provided, God was with me in a very scary time, and he's going to continue to do that. Do you know how big God is? We can't even begin to understand how God works and what his plans mean. That his plans are so much greater, and he has so much more laid out for us than we can even imagine. We forget that we belong to the God of the universe and that he has a larger master plan at work, and sometimes that plan might even involve our suffering. His own son suffered for our salvation because that was the greater plan. Please understand, I'm not saying that God enjoys our suffering. He walks with us in the midst of it. You may be saying, why didn't God heal me? Why didn't he save my job? I honestly can't answer that. I don't know why God chose to help me pay for my car repair, and you may have struggled to pay rent, and that didn't happen. I don't know why I didn't run out of gas during Hurricane Rita, and you were sitting on I-45 without air conditioning. What I can say is that I trust his greater plan is at work. 1 Corinthians 13 reminds us that we see dimly what God is doing, but when we see him face to face, we will see clearly. We only get a dim glimpse of the big plans of God. We don't get to see the whole picture here on earth. We just don't. Our secret ingredient we've talked about all week with the kids is trust. That he calls us to trust that he has a greater plan beyond what our eyes and our ears and our hearts can experience. C.S. Lewis says this: by definition, miracles must, of course, interrupt the usual course of nature. But if they're real, they must, in the very act of so doing, assert all the more the unity and self-consistency of total reality at some deeper level. In other words, the miracle has to also be part of the greater plans of God. And so a lot of times we walk by faith and not by sight. We have to remember that all of creation, including us from the beginning to the end, is part of the plan of our Creator. The true miracle is that even though we are just a speck, just a tiny blip in time in the history of the universe, God chose to reveal himself to us. And part of that plan is we are to cry out to the glory of God. Look around you, go outside, hold a newborn baby. You will see the glory of God. And I have another secret to tell you. If you think you haven't seen a miracle, you're wrong, because you are the miracle. The God of the universe created you and thought you were so important that he would give his life for you. That is the miracle. So, to be front row to miracles, we have to be open. We have to be part of a bigger plan to understand we're tiny, he's big. But we also have to give it all to him. The widow gave it all. She didn't put a little bit back in the pantry just in case the whole thing didn't work. She and Elijah put their fate in the hands of a woman. She only had a cup of flour and a tablespoon of oil. I think sometimes it's not until we get to the end of ourselves that we can see the miracle. I think of all the times God's provided that I've seen in big ways. I was at the end of myself, and then I just had to let it go. And that's kind of a problem for us in this place, in this country, in this culture, because as Christians with some resources, we never truly get to understand our depravity and our need for God. We think we can provide for ourselves. Thank you very much. It's hard for us to get to our total depravity. I don't think it's a coincidence that God shows up the most when we're at the end of ourselves, because he asks us to take up his cross, to surrender to him, to give it all. So why, if we know that when we let it all, we give it all to him, that's when he can do his most amazing work? When we lay it all out, when we say, we have nothing left, take it all, God. Why don't we do that all the time? We all want front row seats. Why is it so hard for us to lay it all out all the time? I think it's probably because we're afraid. We're afraid to let go. We're afraid to let his power reign. Elijah told the widow, don't be afraid. The angel told Mary, don't be afraid. Jesus told the disciples during the storm, don't be afraid. 145 times in the Bible, it says, don't be afraid. And don't be afraid, that was really a call to trust. It was a call to let go of fears and to let God do his work. So I'm telling you today, don't be afraid. Open your eyes. Give up that last of your flour and your oil. Turn it over. Don't keep any left in the pantry. Put your faith in a God who will provide and show you his glory. And let him reveal himself to you puzzle piece by puzzle piece. The secret ingredient is to trust the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your strength, with all your mind. To trust him alone.